of our AgileLIVE webinar, Moving Agile into the Mainstream, is going to feature Sanjeev Augustine, President of LifeSpeed, and Roland Kuehler, Vice President of LifeSpeed. Sanjeev is an industry-leading Agile and Lean expert. He's assisted several leading clients in adopting Agile methods over the past decade. He is the author of numerous publications, including Transitioning to the Agile Project Management and Managing Agile Projects. He's the founder and moderator of Yahoo Agile Project Management Discussion Group. He's also founder and advisory board member of the Agile Project Leadership Network and is a member of the Project Management Institute's Agile Community of Practice. We also have Roland Kuehler, who has years of Agile project management and Lean expertise. He's a leader in helping enterprise-level clients to adopt the use of both Agile and Lean in their organizations. He has helped executives prepare their organizations for Agile transformation by identifying challenges and opportunities related to Agile and Lean implementation and developing Agile plans and risk mitigation strategies to ensure that Agile and Lean initiatives are successful. He has prior experience leading large software development projects for IBM, Lockheed Martin, and DHL. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Sanjeev.
Thank you very much, MH, and welcome everybody to out there in internet land. We are going to be talking about taking a PMO organization and finding ways to manage both Agile and Waterfall projects together. So Roland and I are going to go through our agenda, and our agenda here we'll talk about a little bit of a background out there about what's the situation where most of us are facing as we roll out Agile projects in maybe what's predominantly in a waterfall or maybe a rational unified process or some other environment. We will also talk about the specifics of setting up this thing that we call a hybrid PMO. And to talk about particular details within that, we'll talk about how we might set up a hybrid PMO, how we would track projects within the portfolio, and also how we would have to manage things like resources, resource allocation, and resource management in general. And then we'll wrap up with talking about metrics and how to handle some metrics that might span both Agile and non-Agile teams. So without further ado, let's talk about some of the background. I'm also going to ask Roland to chip in over here. In general, it seems like most of us are facing some environment where we might have implemented a few Agile projects, but at the same time, it's quite likely that we also have within the organization a situation where we might have traditional plan-driven governance, with a PMO structure, or even traditional methodologies being implemented at the same time. Maybe traditional waterfall, some vestige of rational unified process, and Agile methods, maybe not just Scrum as the leading Agile method, but could be extreme programming, could be Kanban as a newer Agile methodology. And we in project management and program management community might be responsible for managing, perhaps sometimes simultaneously, all of these methods at the same time. Tracking and reporting can obviously become a bit of a nightmare, and process compliance might be tremendously challenging. Roland, do you want to chip in and talk about resource management and some of the issues involved?
Yeah, thanks, Sanjeev. I think as I work with numerous clients around the country, I see resource management to be a really nightmare in many IT shops. There's just this endless struggle to account for all the different roles and all of their hours, and slicing and dicing to a very fine level of detail everyone's capacity and availability and hours, and trying to fulfill demand against numerous simultaneous projects. And it really is enough just to make you tear your hair out. And I think that we're going to talk about some different approaches to that, see if we can reframe the problem in a different way that I think would be very advantageous.
Okay. So so the first thing we have to think about is that if we are going about setting up some sort of a governance structure, what is the organizational structure that we might want to consider, and what are some of the preconditions or some of the priming the pump type of work that we need to do? So when Roland and I work with our clients, we generally advise our clients, and certainly we've had good success with an organizational structure such as the one that you see on your screen. You, at the bottom level of our organizational pyramid, you have the individual project teams. Now, these could be waterfall teams, they could be agile teams, it doesn't matter. They could be a number of teams working in parallel. And then what we try to do is establish a higher level governance group that is responsible or is tasked with pulling the work together, making sure the teams are pulling in a similar direction, and coordinating and managing the dependencies between the project teams. You could call that group a PMO, you could call them a transition team, some people will call it a demand management council. Let's just say for the purposes of our webinar, we're calling it a PMO, a project management office or a program management office. Now, a difference between the organizational structure that we are advising or we're recommending and maybe a more traditional PMO is that we like to see the same members who are on the project teams also being a part of the PMO. So these are the elected representatives, if you will. So these could be the Scrum Masters, they could be the project managers, they could be technical leads. We want to see at least one or two of these people on the PMO because we don't want the PMO to become disconnected from the reality on the teams. You could also have people who are just members of the PMO. Maybe there's a VP or director, both business and technical. These people are just at that middle layer of management. Now, the other thing we also like to see is to make sure that we have executive management on the PMO, at least a senior level business executive, maybe an IT executive on the PMO, and also making sure that we're not disconnected from the strategy of the company or the organization. So by having this, what we call overlapping management, or these linking pins, people who span multiple layers in the organization, we do two things. One is we make sure that the PMO is truly connected to the project teams, and then also at the higher level, we make sure that the PMO itself is also connected to the strategy and the executive level as well. Okay. One interesting thing that we could do, whether we have folks who are doing agile teams or non-agile teams, waterfall teams on the PMO, we could run the work of the PMO itself in an agile fashion, which means we could set up some sprints, some iterations, some time boxes. We can plan and prioritize the work. We can get an executive to give us the priorities for the work of the PMO, and then we can deliver the work incrementally, which means that now we can have a team room for the PMO. We could have a war room. Sometimes we would set up something that we would call a portfolio alignment wall. We're tracking very visibly the work of the PMO that's going on, and running this PMO as an agile project team. So now we've sort of made that bridge between a more traditional organization and agile technique of managing the work, if you will. Okay. The next I want to talk about things like process compliance, and I think I'm going to ask Roland to contribute here as well. But one of the things that we need to realize is that it doesn't have to be all or nothing one way or the other, meaning that we can take many agile practices and apply them on waterfall projects as well, and then have some process consistency and some standard guidelines or controls across all of our projects, agile or waterfall. We worked with a major client on the East Coast, and they made the transition to enterprise agile with more than 300 projects going to Scrum. But they also have a number of projects doing waterfall. And if you go to their premises, if you walk around their offices, it's from the outside, it's really tough to tell whether a team is really agile, doing an agile methodology or a waterfall methodology. And this is because they have set up what we would think of things like integrated teams, team rooms, collaborative workspaces for all of the teams, waterfall and agile. So you can see a tracking board for waterfall teams, and you can see them for agile teams. You can see a collaborative workspace for waterfall teams, and you can see them for agile teams. So they have taken what we sometimes think of just, agile practices and applied them across the board. Okay, you could go the other way and say, you know what, we have a risk management plan from a traditional methodology. Let's now make sure that not only are the traditional projects doing risk management, some element of risk management, maybe a PMBOK style risk management, but we'll take that and also integrate it into the release backlog or the product backlog and the release plan for an agile team, which means an agile team will now have a story card to do risk management. Maybe they'll have a risk chart and they'll track risk in a more traditional type of fashion. Now, the benefit of doing this is that we have practices that can go either way, and I must confess my preference is for more agile practices to be adopted on the waterfall side than the other way around. But we also have to be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are many valuable techniques that we could adopt from a more traditional methodology and integrate into agile. Roland, you want to talk more about this slide?
Yeah, I can give an example. I was leading a project team that was very much doing RUP development, almost sort of a mixture between RUP and waterfall for a really large client, and it was all part of a larger waterfall program. I was obviously one of the team to work in a more agile fashion, but we needed to line up with the overall waterfall milestones and deliver working software into test environments at a particular time for integrated testing and things like that. But that didn't mean that we had to do our daily work and our daily practices in a traditional waterfall sense. We could borrow a lot of agile techniques. So even though I was working on this big waterfall project, for my particular team, we did daily stand-ups. I had big visible charts up on the wall of where we were in terms of our progress. We had frequent show and tells and sprint demos, or not sprint demos, but demonstrations of interim working functionality that we needed to produce. I had a card wall where we had all the tasks that needed to get done, which ones were doing and which ones were completed. And so if you came in and looked at that team, you'd probably think that they were an agile team, but really we were very much functioning in a waterfall world. And you can mix some of these techniques. A lot of the agile techniques are really good practices to do. And you can do them in either case, and I could have some firms that say, these are really best practices that we should do no matter what our process is, so whether the team be a waterfall team or an agile team or a RUP team. These are all good things to practice that we could standardize on across the board.
Yeah. And in particular, the technical practices, the agile engineering practices, or just the technical good software discipline practices like automated builds, automated tests, these have been done in industry for at least the last 20 years or so, and there's no reason that we should be trying to do them only on agile projects. We should be looking at insisting on automated builds, automated testing, both unit testing and acceptance testing on all of our projects, and that way we can create a common standard of technical excellence across all of our project teams and methodologies. Okay, I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about some of the other work that our PMO might need to do. And this is really preparing to apply some higher level portfolio management discipline to the work that's in the work management queue. A lot of times we have in our portfolios a bunch of additional projects, things that have been not really adding value, large projects, things that people are not working on and not delivering, but they're just hanging out there. They're sucking up some, they're a drain on our resources, and they're not allowing us to get moving quickly. So even before we get started, into the project management side, it behooves us to take a look at the portfolio and say, you know what, let's take a look, let's clean up our project portfolio. Maybe we have 20 projects. There's one project that's been dragging along. It's been a drain on resources. We don't really know the reason for it. It started 2 years ago. It's still pulling resources. Let's terminate that project. Let's get it off the highway, if you will. We have some other large projects that really could benefit from being chopped down. And even if they're waterfall projects, we could chop a large waterfall project down into 2 or 3 smaller waterfall projects. Or maybe you can break it down, a large waterfall project, and say, let's break it into 3 small projects, and one of them will do Agile, and the other 2 will do waterfall, or some combination thereof. And we certainly want to get prioritization of these projects by business value. We want to limit the development time frame to months, and drive some of the behaviors of these small releases, short deliveries into production. And the reason we want to do this is because of the equation that you see on the screen. The cycle time we see is a function, or is directly proportional to work in process. The more work in process we have, the longer will be our cycle time, or the longer our projects will take in our portfolio. The best way to reduce the project cycle time is not just increasing our completion rate, as we see in the denominator over there, but actually reducing the number of projects we have in our portfolio. So sometimes we'd like to jump straight into doing Agile, jump straight into doing waterfall projects, but a lot of times you can get more a bigger bang for a buck by actually devoting some of our attention to the portfolio level. Okay. So with that, in terms of setting up an integrated process and setting up an organizational structure, taking a brief look at our portfolio and cleaning some things up, now we're ready to get into running our projects, whether waterfall or Agile, and actually tracking them while they are in flight. Now we have a couple of things a couple of ways to do this. I'll let Roland talk about this slide where we can probably take a conventional Gantt chart-like approach and track both Agile and waterfall simultaneously. Roland?
Okay. I've been working with a team recently that is part of a much larger program, and the larger program is more of a waterfall program. But there are many teams contributing to this large program, and some of those teams are Agile teams. And so the question is, how do we integrate the schedules and the dependencies and the milestones, et cetera, across these different teams? I think when waterfall teams and Agile teams obviously have very different ideas about planning and the level of planning and the level of granularity and milestones and things like that. Obviously, Agile teams tend to go through the entire software development lifecycle, every iteration. The goal of each iteration is to produce working software, and so you do some design, you do some development, you do some coding, you do some testing, and you deliver. And so you go through the whole software development lifecycle, every iteration, versus in a waterfall is really optimized around a single pass. Can I do everything once and only once? And by putting a lot of rigor into the planning part of that, that hopefully I don't have to ever go back. It usually doesn't work out that way, and we have a lot of change requests and defects at the end and things like that, but that's the goal. So they have very different planning paradigms. And so how do we integrate these two different paradigms? Well, what we're doing on some of these projects is having to probably spend a fair bit of time with our Agile teams doing fairly good estimation and planning so that we can map dependencies across the different teams. So I can see up on the top in the waterfall team, they're in the requirements phase in green, and perhaps they can start to deliver at least some of the requirements that are well understood. Maybe the most important high priority ones are the ones with architectural significance to Agile teams, and Agile teams can start to build architecture spikes and start to get some of that architecture up and running and actually build it and check it out. Agile teams could also start to produce GUI mock-ups and produce perhaps some simple transactions that span the different layers of the architecture to make sure that all of this actually works. And we can deliver that back up to the waterfall team as an input to the design. So when the waterfall team goes into detailed design, well, we actually have now tested out some of that architecture. We have some GUI mock-ups that we can start to look at and see where we want to make changes. As the waterfall team starts to solidify some of those designs, they might be able to deliver some of those designs back to the Agile team, and the Agile team can start now building features. And maybe the Agile team builds features 1, 2, and 3, and 4, 5, and 6, for example, and at the end of sprint 4, they deliver back up into development, the development phase of the waterfall team. And the waterfall team maybe now has an API that they needed, or has a database tables, some database tables defined, or other aspects of the system that they can start to build their development upon. Likewise, the waterfall team, if you're looking at around the August-September column, maybe they've got APIs now that they have finally developed after all these months, and they can deliver those back to the Agile team, and the Agile team can build upon those and then deliver features 13, 14, and 15. And then we're all going to deliver into test in October, and both teams at that point are focusing on bug fixes and stabilization and optimization and performance and getting things ready to go to production. So this can work, and it does work. It does require, from our Agile teams, probably to do more planning, more estimation than they might be used to if they were operating solo. But if we can get to this level of planning and estimation and get those dependencies mapped out, then the Agile teams and the waterfall teams can coexist and to deliver to one another. I'm going to turn it over to Sanjeev for the next slide, who can talk about how we might visualize this in a project setting.
Yep. Thanks, Rowan. You know, one of the things that we have the pleasure of working with is some clients who do Agile at the enterprise level. So what you see here is an example of what we call a portfolio alignment wall. This is from a program, an Agile program, an overall Agile program of about 21 projects. And the work of 21 projects is being tracked in, if you will, in this submatrix over here. So you have some rows and some columns. Each one of the columns represents a sprint or a particular time box. Now, we could say if it's a month-by-month time box, then we can apply that not only to the Agile teams, but also to other waterfall teams that are operating in parallel. So on the other hand, we have rows over here that represent feature streams or things that are moving from left to right into production. And within each of the rows, you see that you have these cards, and you have different colored cards representing different teams. You have different cards, and on the cards you see little sticky notes, little red sticky notes, different things that are indicated. The cards themselves represent work packages. So you can think of a work package as starting from the left, traversing along a row or particular feature stream, moving from left to right along the timeline. Now what we have here is this, in this room, this is kind of a war room for program management, if you will, or the hybrid PMO, where everybody gets together, both the agile teams and non-agile teams, and they're tracking the work. And they want to see that the work is flowing, stream seamlessly from left to right. We also have those little dots that indicate the dependencies within the team, which means you've got a work package, and if there are 4 or 5 projects that are dependent, then they can track the dependencies, and it's a representation. It's a very large, big, visible representation of maybe of a traditional Gantt chart. Now, what this allows is that you can have in-person meetings here, you can have a PMO meeting here, and you can very visually and tangibly track the flow of value, or track the work and manage the dependencies, and do agile-style management on a hybrid project. So here's the little legend over here. The features are laid out on the index card as per the overall release plan. Card colors identify the teams. Labels identify the dependence team. The rows are tracking the feature sprints, and the columns are tracking the sprints, or the timeline, or just the month-by-month tracking if you don't like the term sprint, which unfortunately some people may be in the situation. Okay. So having covered setting up the Agile PMO or this hybrid PMO, and being able to track work within the portfolio, I'm going to turn it over to Roland. He's going to drive, and I'm going to be the one chipping in now and then. And Roland's going to talk about resource management and also about metrics. Roland?
Okay, thanks, Sanjeev. One of the things that I'm seeing pretty much on a daily basis at many clients is just insanity, if you will, around resource management. It's kind of like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube, trying to get all the resources lined up of the different types. I've got architects, and I've got solutions analysts, and business analysts, and lead developers, and junior developers, and lead testers, and junior testers, and production support people, and they all have different rates associated with them, and they all need different hours from each of them, and it really is a nightmare to get it all lined up and match that up against the demand for project work that the business partners come to us with. And it is really difficult. And the way it usually works is, projects get initiated, and then, okay, we have to go around and scour the countryside, if you will, looking for the right resources to work the project. What skills do I need? And who's available? And when are they available? And all that sort of thing. And we're able to carve up people's time very finely down to the hour level. I pull a few hours from this person and a few hours from that person, and somehow cobble together enough hours to deliver this project. There's no real notion of a team there necessarily, kind of borrowing hours here and there and everywhere. And when you do this, you're able to actually do a lot of projects simultaneously. You can borrow hours from this person and that person, and this person has 20% of their time that's not allocated, and that person has 10% of their time that's not allocated. I could shove another project in there. And pretty soon I've got 20 projects going on all at the same time. And there are issues associated with that, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but this is all really difficult to manage and can kind of turn into madness. And the other thing that happens is more the people aspect. I think we've all heard about the storming and forming and storming and norming and performing and all of that sort of thing. And when people work together, it takes them some time to learn each other's personalities and skills and strengths and weaknesses, and learn how to work together and communicate effectively and gel as a team. And when we work this way through the slicing and dicing and the Rubik's Cube of resource management, we often don't really get to form good, strong, working teams. People come together for a short period of time. By the time they've gone through the forming and storming, maybe by the time they get to norming and performing, the project is ended. They are dispersed back into the resource pool, and it all starts over again. And we never get to the point of really having high-performing teams. And so, this is all a source of frustration for a lot of folks. And so we've been thinking about some different ways of approaching this problem. And Sanjeev, if you'll go to the next slide. Thank you very much. The paradigm I just described is really one around where the project is the central unit of focus. We organize around the project. We initiate a project, and then we pull people, resources together from hither and yon to man the project, and then we return those people back to the pools. And the problem, of course, is that projects are ephemeral, right? They don't last forever, and even by definition, the PMI definition is that a project is a specific time-boxed event that has a beginning and a definite end. And so, is that really the right way to? Should that be the unit of organization? Is something that is short-lived? What we've been talking with customers about is organizing around teams instead. Can I have more of a steady state team that supports a particular application or supports a particular business area or supports a particular technology? And I find projects, or when projects are initiated, I need to figure out which team is the best team to focus that project upon. And say this project uses this particular technology and it's for this line of business and this particular application. They're for Team X. Team X is the right team to do that work. They have those skills. That's what they do day in and day out. And this project is for them. And now I've got more of a steady state team. They get to work together. They stay together. They know each other's strengths and weaknesses. They can get to be a very high-performing team. And our job in the portfolio management office is to prioritize the projects, figure out which projects are the right projects for the right teams. And I'm now bringing the work to the people instead of taking the people to the work. And I think this is a much more stable way to operate. It requires much less resource management. I'm not moving people around. I'm moving projects around. And there may be times when, yes, you need certain special skills for a particular project. And in those cases, you might have to move a few people around. A few specialists might need to move around, but you're not moving everybody all the time. And a lot of the resource management issue just goes away. We tend to, I think a lot of the work that we do tends to be fairly repeatable, at least in terms of organization. And by that I mean, most project work requires a certain percentage of development capacity, a certain development of testing capacity, a certain amount of business analyst support. And so I can form teams that are fairly stable with the appropriate percentages of skills, if you will, and then just move a few people around here and there as needed. And I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. Sanjeev, you want to add anything before I move on to the next slide?
No, I'm good. This is good.
Okay. Go right ahead then.
Okay.
To the next slide, if you will.
Sure, no problem. Okay, thanks. Before it shows up.
And I wanted to talk about maybe changing what it is that we sell. And in IT, I think a lot of times we've kind of gotten into a staffing model somewhat where we're selling person hours. Oh, I need 40 hours of senior developer time and 80 hours of junior developer time, and et cetera, et cetera. And some of you may remember back in the olden days, if you went to buy a car, let's say, you could tell the car dealer, well, I'd like the fancy leather seats, but I don't want the fancy wheels and I don't want heat warmers. You used to be able to kind of put together an a la carte car, if you will. And the car companies and dealers have gotten away from that over the years, and now they sell packages, right? They sell a package, okay, then you want the premium package, and it comes with all this stuff. And another analogy is, let's say your son or daughter is getting married, and you need to hire a band for the weekend to come and play music. You don't usually go and cobble together, well, I need 4 hours from the saxophone player to play these 3 songs. I need the drummer there the whole time. I need a singer there the whole time. A trumpet player, I only need them for 2 songs. I'm only going to buy an hour of their. You don't do that, right? You buy the band. And what I want to talk about is us not selling person hours, but selling team iterations, right? We can define a small sub-team, if you will, to be, let's say, depending on what your particular resource model is, 1 pair of developers, a tester, half of a BA, a little bit of the architect's time, and a little bit of a test lead's time. And that is the unit that we sell, this sub-team, this small team. It's a fully functional team. They've got all the skills that they need to do the job. And we can sell that unit instead of the individual hours of each of those people. And let's even get away from talking about hours. Maybe we can talk about, if you're working in Agile, let's talk about iterations. I sell this team for an iteration. That's sort of the smallest unit of work that we have. Or if you're in a waterfall world, you might think about team months or team weeks. I sell this small sub-team for a week or 2 weeks. So that when a project comes along, we need to estimate how many of these little teams do we need. Okay, maybe it's a big project and I need 3 or 4 of these teams. Or if it's a small project, maybe I only need 1. And maybe this is a 3-iteration project or a 10-iteration project. And that's kind of what I'm selling. That's my unit that I'm selling. And so we estimate this project to be 1 team for 3 iterations. And we have a blended rate for this team that takes into account our particular resource model and all the different costs associated with all of these people. And I can just say this, okay, if it's 3 iterations, then this particular project is going to cost 3x, x being our blended rate, and it's going to take 6 weeks. And I think if we have standing teams and we sell not hours but team iterations, a lot of the resource management problem just goes away. We just need to, I think, get out of selling individual grains of rice and get into selling whole bags of rice. It's, I think, the proper way to think about it. It maintains our teams, is easier to manage, and this is really the honest truth. This is how we work. And so just something to think about. I'd like to see if we can get more people in the industry start to think in this manner. Sanjeev, do you want to add anything before we go to the next slide?
Only that this model is equally applicable to both an Agile and a waterfall team. Sometimes we might think this is a something of just an Agile symptom, but really once we start to think of the whole band and not the individual players together, you could have a waterfall band and an Agile band equally deployable, if you will, instead of separating things and looking for person hours. Right. I move to the next slide.
Okay, and then one more slide related to this. When we do sell individual person hours and we're slicing and dicing to that level of detail, it is possible to support many, many projects at the same time. And most of our organizations, in my experience, and I know Sanjeev's as well, do support many, many projects at the same time, often to their detriment, actually. There's a lot of theory behind this, which we won't necessarily go into. Theory from queuing theory, from manufacturing inventory management theory, Little's Law, and some other things. But there are a variety of examples of places where when you have mega high, super high utilization, you actually slow down. Right? If we ran our transaction servers at 100% CPU utilization, transaction speed would grind to a halt. Right? If we ran our networks at 100% network capacity, they would grind to a halt. Right? We have to have headroom in both of those cases in order to have responsiveness and speed and quick throughput. And we recognize that in the hardware world, and we certainly recognize it in the traffic world. You can see from this picture, on the right-hand side, the highway is highly utilized. If we were optimizing for utilization, we'd say the picture on the right is goodness. This is what we want. Every square foot of highway is covered with car. Right? What's the problem with that, of course, is that no one's actually getting anywhere. There's a tremendous demand for these resources. No one's able to move forward because everyone is bogged down delivering on other projects, and things just sort of come to a grinding halt. There's a lot of work going on. If we have all these projects going, if each of these cars represented a project, yeah, everyone's billing. We're spending a lot. There's a lot of work happening. There's just not a lot of delivery happening. And if you look on the other side of that highway, you see fewer cars. And obviously those fewer cars are moving much faster, non-linearly so. And so we need to find a way to work with our business partners to come up with a resource management model and a demand management model and a portfolio management model that is very clear about what it is we're trying to optimize. If we are trying to optimize utilization and make sure that every person's hours is accounted for, and we are maximizing the number of projects that we start, then we can certainly optimize for that. We'll have the picture on the right with the loaded up highway, and we are making an explicit trade-off there that we value utilization over delivery speed, because that's what you're going to get. If you say no, time to market is crucial, speed is crucial, responsiveness is crucial, business is constantly changing, our competitive landscape is constantly changing, what customers want is constantly changing, and we must be a responsive organization. That you need to be more like what's on the left-hand side of this highway. We have fewer projects going on at once. We focus on them. We get them done very quickly. We get them out the door quickly. We deliver to production. We get value from those quickly, and then we're ready to reevaluate and take on the next set of projects instead of having individual projects go on forever stuck in this gridlock. So be mindful as you set up your PMOs and as you discuss project starts that every time you start up a project, you are making a conscious decision to slow down all of the others. And just be aware that that trade-off is happening, whether you're aware of it or not. And I think that's it for this slide. Sanjeev, we can go very quickly to metrics. We're almost out of time. We'll have a few more minutes. I'll quickly go through some of the metrics slide and then turn it back over to Sanjeev. So Sanjeev, you can go ahead and go to the next slide.
Yep.
When you have multiple projects going on, we need to find measures for these projects that sort of transcend the process that they are using. And a lot of times our metrics are very focused on the process itself, phase gate sign-offs, and phase gate deliveries, or velocity calculations, or release burn downs, and things like that. And those are fine. I think we should do those at the individual team level, depending on what the particular process is. But we need to find also a way to measure up, I think, and find measures that transcend the individual teams. Financial calculations are one, certainly. I won't go into all the details of the net present value that's captured here. There's a lot of information about that out there. So the nice thing about net present value, it does take time into account. It says that $1 today is worth more than $1 tomorrow. And not only is it important how much a project costs and how much benefit we gain from the project, but when we get that gain. And net present value gives you credit for delivering early. Early increases in cash flow, money that we get sooner from delivering sooner, makes the NPV go way up. And it's one of those metrics, I think, that it takes the time value of money and the time criticality of our projects into account. If you're doing a lot of projects simultaneously, you're probably going to have really low NPVs because you've got really long delivery times. Next slide, Sanjeev. Earned value is another area. There's a lot of use of earned value in the waterfall world, especially for larger programs. And I just wanted to point out that you can use earned value techniques and thinking in Agile projects. I'm going to focus on the first two lines of the chart, for example. Let's say that we've got a project that is scheduled for 10 Agile iterations, and we're now halfway through the project, and we've just completed the 5th iteration. So from a schedule standpoint, we're 50% complete with the project. Let's say that we've got a backlog that's been estimated out in points, if you will, and maybe there's 100 points worth of work that needs to get done. And maybe we've only completed 40 points of the 100. So we're halfway through the schedule, 50% done from a time standpoint. We're only 40% done from a feature delivery standpoint, and therefore we are 10% behind schedule in terms of our schedule performance. The planned percent complete is what iteration we're on divided by the total number of iterations. The actual percent complete, APC, is how many stories we've actually completed versus the total number of points worth of stories that are out there. And I can compare those two and get a schedule performance index, for example. I'm not going to go through all the calculations. There's information out there about this. But this is another common metric that you could use to measure across both Agile projects and Waterfall. And Sanjeev, I think our last metric slide, very quickly, and then I'll turn it back over to you and we'll close it out. Right on time, I believe. This is probably one of our favorites. I know it's one of Sanjeev's favorites, certainly one of mine, the Net Promoter Score. The idea behind the Net Promoter Score is that Bain and Company, Boston consulting folks, came up with a single question that they found had great predictive power in terms of customer satisfaction and in terms of revenue growth and profitability for firms. And this one simple question was, how likely are you to recommend our product or service to a friend or a colleague. And what you do is you measure your stakeholders and determine how many people are promoters of your service. They think you do outstanding work, and they would recommend you to other people. How many people are detractors? They actually hate your service. They would prefer not to do business with you again, and they would actually go out of their way to tell other people not to do business with you. And you can calculate a Net Promoter Score. Some of the companies out there with outstanding Net Promoter Scores are companies like USAA, financial services company in San Antonio, Apple Computers, Google, Amazon have fantastic Net Promoter Scores. People love them. Their customers love them. And there are companies out there who have really bad Net Promoter Scores, and I probably won't mention their names. But the goal or the purpose of this is that we should be engaging with our stakeholders, even internally. We can do something like this. We can measure our business partners, our project stakeholders, find out, do people like what we're doing? Are they excited about what they're doing? Do they promote us? Or are they detractors? Do they, really not want to do business with us, and they're only doing business with us because they have to? And using this information to improve our processes, improve how we deliver in very targeted ways. My last point on this is that this is really not about the score itself. Don't worry too much about the numbers or about calculating the right score or finding out the statistical validity of the survey instruments. This is about engaging with your business partners, finding out what they like and don't like, and doing something about it. And that's probably the most important metric that there is. That's what's ultimately going to determine whether we in IT have jobs in the future. So I think that closes us out. Sanjeev, do you want to add anything? I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Roland. I think that is really good coverage of metrics. So essentially, I just want to sort of wrap up by saying, when we're setting up a PMO, our PMO doesn't have to be just an Agile PMO. We can certainly set up a governance structure in the fashion that we've laid out, where we talk about setting up an overlapping management structure and with the linking pins, and we have people from both Agile projects and non-Agile projects working together as one team to manage their programs and projects. Also, we talked about once the projects are in flight, we want to be able to track them, whether it's through a standard Gantt chart overall, like a Microsoft project schedule, or a more Agile technique, both of which can be applied to both Agile and waterfall projects. Roland spent a lot of time talking about resource management and some of the thinking of utilization versus throughput over there. We certainly should be focusing much more on finishing projects rather than starting them, on understanding the cost of starting new projects and the impact of one project on all of the other projects in the portfolio, just like adding more cars to a highway affects all the other cars on the highway. So just in terms of resource management and portfolio management, lower work in process, fewer projects in the portfolio is much more valuable. And then to round out, we talked about metrics and how to measure different projects and subjecting both waterfall and Agile projects to financial metrics like NPV, outcome-facing metrics, and then also customer satisfaction and more scheduled metrics like an EVM type calculation. Finally, in terms of process compliance, on one of the earlier slides, we saw that we can peel the onion apart, if you will, and take a few Agile practices, maybe take many Agile practices and start to practice those on waterfall projects, and then we have a standard baseline of process compliance that we can apply. So that's it. We can turn over for questions. I think we have a few minutes left. If you need to contact us, you see both our emails out there. On the first page, we also have our Twitter handles. We're both fairly accessible over the internet. Let's turn it over to MH, and she'll call up some questions, and we can answer those.
Hi, guys. We actually didn't have a lot of questions. One of our only questions was, will the presentation be available, because it was so relevant to their current situation. So yes, the actual presentation in addition to the slides will both be available.
Sure.
If anyone else has any questions? We got to thank you so much.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Alrighty, well, we appreciate everyone's time, and we look forward to providing more AgileLIVE seminars moving Agile into the mainstream over the coming months. We especially appreciate Sanjeev and Roland for their incredible information and presentations today. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Appreciate it.